A couple of years ago, these two companies were basically tied, both chasing what might be the biggest prize in modern medicine. And then something strange happened. One of them blew past $1 trillion, while the other lost almost half its value. And at this point, most of Wall Street has basically written its obituary. The consensus is pretty much settled. Lilly won, Novo's finished. I'm not so sure. And I think the reason comes down to something most finance channels just can't see because it's hidden in the medicine. So let me walk you through it, and by the end you can decide for yourself whether Novo's funeral is a little premature. Quick word on who I am so you know where this is coming from. I'm Dr. Shu. My background's in oncology. I did my PhD in cancer research, so I tend to look at these companies the way a physician would, not the way a trader does. And that's really the whole idea of this channel. I take the pharma and biotech names everyone's talking about, the earnings, the pipelines, the FDA decisions, and I try to explain what the science underneath actually means for the stock. If that sounds useful, it'd genuinely help if you subscribed. One thing before we start though, none of this is financial advice. I'm not here to tell you what to buy. I just think the medicine usually tells you more than the ticker does. So let's start with where things actually stand. Lilly today is worth around $1 trillion. Novo is worth maybe a fifth of that. And the part that's really telling is the valuation. Investors are willing to pay roughly twice as much for every dollar Lilly earns as they are for Novo's. In other words, the market has decided that one of these is a rocket ship and the other is dead weight. The thing I actually want to dig into tonight is that fair? To understand how the gap got this big, you kind of have to forget the stock price for a minute and look at the actual drug. The simple version is this. These medicines work by hitting hormone targets in the body, and as a rule, the more targets a drug hits, the more weight people lose. Novo's drug hits one of them, Lilly's hits two, and that's a big part of why it pulled ahead, and the one Lilly's got coming next hits three. So, if you're scoring this purely on weight loss, Lilly is winning, and honestly, it's not close. But here's where most people stop the analysis. That scoreboard is measuring the wrong thing. Let me show you what it misses. Here's a question almost nobody bothers to ask. When you lose all that weight on these drugs, what are you actually losing? Most people assume it's all fat. It isn't. On Novo's semaglutide in the body composition studies, something like 40% of the weight lost was lean mass. Now, that's not all pure muscle, but it's tissue you really don't want to be giving up. And think about what that means. You're not just getting smaller, you're losing part of your engine. For someone young, that's probably manageable. But for an older patient, that's where you start worrying about frailty, about falls, about ending up in a hospital bed. So the smartest people in this field have quietly started changing the question. It's not how much weight can we strip off anymore. It's how do we take off the fat while keeping the muscle. And it turns out the biology that does that best runs on a completely different hormone called amylin. Now here's the interesting part. Novo's entire next generation of drugs is built on amylin, the exact platform the market just dismissed as a failed bet. I'd argue it's actually pole position for the next race. And if you want the real tell, Lilly is now developing its own amylin drug. When the champion starts copying the so-called loser's playbook, it's worth paying attention. There is a second thing that scoreboard hides, and I think of it as a wall. The stronger you make these drugs, the harder they are to tolerate. More nausea and more people who simply stop taking them. In Lilly's own trial for that 3-target drug, pushing the dose all the way up did buy more weight loss, but the dropout rate nearly tripled. And out in the real world, it's even messier. Somewhere around half of patients are off these drugs within a year. So the biggest number in a clinical trial and the weight people actually keep off in real life are two very different things. Being gentle enough that patients will stay on it might matter more than the headline, and gentle happens to be exactly what amylin is good at. Now here's something the weight loss numbers completely miss. Who's actually paying for these drugs? Insurers. And insurers don't care how good you look on the beach. They care about outcomes. Does it prevent heart attacks, kidney failure, death? This is where Novo has some real trophies. about a 20% drop in cardiovascular events, and a kidney trial they actually had to stop early because it was working so well. In fairness, Lilly's been catching up fast, so both of them have deep evidence here. But this is also what makes the whole CagriSema story kind of unfair. Everyone calls that drug a failure. It delivered around 23% weight loss, which is genuinely excellent. Its only real sin was that, on a cross-trial comparison, it didn't beat Lilly's very best, and almost nothing clears that bar. So the market basically punished an A- for not being an A+. Now, I don't want to hand you a one-sided story, so let's be honest about the bad news because it's real. Last quarter, Lilly was absolutely on fire. Their top drug more than doubled its sales in a single quarter. Novo, by comparison, barely moved. One of its two big drugs actually shrank, and management came right out and warned that profits are going to fall this year. So the momentum right now is entirely on Lilly's side. I'm not going to spin that. It's just true. On the pipeline, Lilly's ahead here too. They've got the more convenient oral GLP-1 pill, plus that 3-target heavyweight on the way. But there's one move almost everyone overlooked. For a long time, the real constraint in this industry wasn't demand. It was just making enough of the drug. You can't sell something that's stuck waiting on factory capacity. And while everyone was staring at trial results, Novo quietly spent $11 billion buying up manufacturing plants. They didn't chase the headline, they went and bought the bottleneck. So where do I actually land on all this? Let me be straight with you. Lilly is the better company, better drugs, a deeper pipeline, and the stronger oral pill story. If you want the cleaner, safer version of this trade, honestly, that's Lilly. But here's my issue. The market is grading this whole race on peak weight loss, and that's the one number I think is going to matter at least 5 years from now. On the things that'll actually decide it: lean mass, tolerability, outcomes, supply. The gap between $1 trillion Lilly and a left-for-dead Novo just isn't as wide as the share prices suggest. So here's my call for what it's worth. I'm mildly bullish on Novo's risk-reward. Not because I think it beats Lilly, it probably won't, but because its amylin bet looks mispriced. Its outcomes data is still very real, and the funeral feels premature. Am I certain? Not at all. The risks are genuine. Pricing pressure, patents running out, execution, a management team still rebuilding trust. I'm betting on a mispricing, not a miracle. And to be clear, none of this is financial advice. Anyway, that's my read. What I'd really like is to hear yours. Lilly or Novo 5 years from now. Tell me where you think I've got it wrong down in the comments. Honestly, the people arguing the science down there are the best part of this whole channel. And if you got something out of this, digging into the medicine behind the money is pretty much what I do here every episode. So if that's your kind of thing, subscribe and stick around. I'm Dr. Shu. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.